In this video, we're going to create a piece of game UI that was originally designed as a flat image, but we're going to take it and convert it to an SVG and then introduce stateful augmentations into the SVG paths themselves according to what's happening in the game, kind of making stateful adjustments on the fly. We're going to use just a pretty simple life bar example, but you can take these concepts and run with them to create whatever kind of UI you need for your project. You see on my screen, I have a little example here. There's a little seed character with a health bar, and there's minus and plus buttons. So if I click the minus button, see the health will start to deplete, and then as it gets lower, it turns yellow, and then red, and then eventually empty, and the seed dies. It's really sad. And then conversely, I can also increase the life bar. I do want to say real quick, in this video, we're just really going to focus on the meat of the concept here, which is having an SVG and then changing the paths around according to the state of the game. There are some extras in here like the minus button and the plus button, the little seed that dies at the end. Those are all, the code for that's all available in the code pen below, links in the description, and you're welcome to take that and run with it. But the concepts we're going to be covering here are mostly just around the life bar itself. Now I've created a little comp here for us. This is the image editing program that I like to use. It's called Sprite. I'll link to that in the description below too. It's specifically designed for pixel art, and I just love it. It's super worth picking up. But what I like to do is get in here and kind of just make a nice spread out artboard of kind of all the little different variations in the UI that I'm working on. So you can see here that we start with a life bar, and it's got kind of like the background of it is the depleted state. But then also in here we have versions where it's fully full, and so we have a green full rectangle here that covers the entire width of the inner part. And then as it gets lower, it turns yellow around the halfway point, and then finally it turns red as it gets really, really, really low. A common pattern in video games. And so I'd like to just kind of demonstrate all the different things I'm going to want this piece to do. And I can just kind of see it all here. There's also some extra bits like the buttons we saw in the demo before and this little HP label. Anyway, like I said at the top, this UI is being designed in an art program designed for making video games. So we feel right at home here. But when it's time to actually use it in a web project, often pixel art or raster like .png files aren't necessarily always optimal. In this case, we really want to utilize SVG so that we can not only have a nice responsive asset, but also be able to pull off some of these state changes on the fly using SVG paths. And so my workflow for that is basically taking a slice of the life bar here. So I would like highlight just what I want, export that piece. I'd have to get it just right. I kind of messed up there. Taking exactly what you want, exporting just that slice out of it into a PNG image, and then I drop it into this tool. And the tool is called Pixels to SVG, created by a developer named Steven Shaw, amazing dude. And how it works is this tool, which again I'll link to below, you take a .png image, drop it in here, and then it will on the fly convert it to an SVG for you in a nice optimized way. A lot of tools like Sketch and Illustrator also have that kind of functionality where you can just grab an SVG out of it. But there's, which is sometimes the right thing to do, but there's often a lot of like cruft and stuff in that export. This is just beautifully clean and specifically designed for pixel art. So the workflow there is you can either drag a file in here or you can hit choose files. And then I've pre-prepared a little image asset. You can see this is just a slice of that life bar that I showed you before in Sprite. So I'll open it up, and then right on the fly, you see the image preview over here with the SVG paths right over here. And so what I'm going to do is just copy the SVG. I've started a blank new code pen over here, and I'll just paste the SVG into the code pen. And just see what we're looking at right off the fly. The SVG is expanding to fill its entire container. And so as I move the window down, you see that image get smaller. But you can see that it retains that nice pixel perfect clarity, which is excellent. It's exactly what we want. I'm going to add a class here and just kind of position this life bar to get it set up for us to work with. And so here, I might format this a little bit differently too. I'm just going to indent maybe to make it slightly easier to read. So on the SVG itself, I'm going to go ahead and add a class of health bar. And then down here, just doing some things to make it like a little bit nicer to look at as we get going here. So I'll set the width to like 75 VW, which is going to be, now you kind of see it size according to the screen, but in view unit widths, and then viewport unit width. And then let's do some stuff to center it. Okay, so now it's still responsive to the size, but it's just kind of floating in the middle, kind of easy to see. I might make it a touch bigger. Okay, now we are set up and ready to go. So conceptually what we're doing here is showing a percentage. If you imagine in context of a video game, maybe you have a character who has max health of 100 and a current health of 50. That would be like saying, the character has 50% of its life, 50 over 100, 50%. And so our objective here is to basically show a life bar that's half filled in. And one of the huge, great advantages of using SVG in the first place is that we have things like percentages available to us. So we can create a new path, give it a width of a certain percent, and then that's going to do most of the heavy lifting for us. It's just on us to calculate what the percent is based on the max health and the current health. However, there's a tiny bit of a challenge here where just doing a new path with a percent right off the bat here wouldn't quite work, because the image that we're dealing with has some extra data in it. If I go over here, see that there's a bit over here and then a bit over here, but the area we want to fill in is only this like gray rectangle. And so what we need to do is carve out a space that we're going to put our new paths into, the stateful ones. So to achieve this carved out space where we can put our new paths, we're actually going to nest another SVG inside this current SVG. And so to do that, I'm going to make a comment here. Let's see. So let's call it fill container. And then in here is a new SVG. I'm going to go ahead and put a rectangle in it too, and I'll show you why in a second. And we just need some basic things on this SVG. And again, I'll go through that in a second. But this is the exact workflow I use when I'm taking a base SVG and then augmenting it with my own paths. Is basically start by finding the area that needs to be filled in. And so a kind of nice visual way to do that is to make a rectangle inside this SVG that does fills the width and the height all 100%, and then give it like a wacky fill, like cyan. And now you see on screen that we see our new SVG showing up, and this is occupying the space that you see here because I have x0, y0, and then a width of 3 and a height of 3. So if I take it and expand it, you'll see that we can kind of place this SVG where in the spots where we're going to want to implement our fill. And so what that means for us is that we need to line it up perfectly with the gray area there. And so it's kind of actually kind of like seeing it in a weird space first, because it makes it feel so much better when it's in the right spot. But I'll go ahead and move it over 3, and then it looks like 2. One thing to note is that the tool from Stephen Shaw that we used earlier to get the SVG outputs the view box. It's starting at negative 0.5 on the second value there. And so to do that, we have to compensate by adding a dot 5.5 in the Y value here. So otherwise, without that, you can see that it's just off by like half a pixel, which is bad. For pixel art, that's really bad. It's got to be perfectly on the pixel. So there is that. And now it looks like the height is correct. You can see it go over to verify it. Yeah, that 3 is the correct height. You can also go in and just like inspect closely in the editor you use to make the asset to find the right size. Then I'll go ahead and stretch this out. Try 30. So 30 is close, but it's not quite there. It looks like 32 is right. Nice. Okay, so now we have the space carved out, and just to demonstrate what I meant before. Right now we're saying 100%. If we make a calculation on the fly, which we'll do in a second using some JavaScript, and say that we dynamically set this to like 50%, now the value is 50%, the health bar is showing 50%. We're not totally done with just one fill though. If we look back at the comp, and if I zoom in here, you see that there's this top row that has a slightly lighter green color and then kind of the body color. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing that too. So what we'll do is almost duplicate the same thing on the next row, but we'll say it's only got a height of 1 pixel, and these are defaulting to x0, y0, so that's why we didn't have to do anything like that. If you're making a more complex UI, I've done some in the past that aren't just one solid bar, it's like several kind of connected little, almost like orbs that fit together. You might need to get crazier with positioning these like top left values, but for now, for what we're doing, not defining x and y at all is totally fine. And I'm going to change this to be, I like to use wacky colors just so you can totally see it working. You know, so now you see the yellow bars on top properly. We'll come in and put our actual design colors in kind of towards the end. It's just visually you get some like really quick feedback on if the right thing is happening or not when you use these wacky colors at first. So now what we're going to do is start targeting these new paths that we've created with JavaScript and dynamically setting the width on the fly. And of course, that's to emulate whatever would be going on in the game. So let's see, the first thing we're going to do is add some classes so that we can target it and select them with JavaScript. So I'm going to, again, like you've seen me do, I do the BEM style thing most of the time. So we'll call this health bar fill. And then we'll copy the same thing over. This one we're also going to add another class to it. We'll come back and do that later, but we want to specify that this is the top one too. That's going to help us with the coloring in a little bit. But so we have a health bar fill class now. So down here in the JavaScript, I don't need the CSS right now, so I'll give us some more real estate here. Say like var fills. So we're going to use query selector all because we are expecting to find multiple here. If you see, there are 2 rectangle classes that we want. And so if I select like that, throw in the dot in front of it because it is a class, that will give us an array of both the rectangles. And so now what I'm going to do is let's just carve out some variables too. Like what we were saying before is current health 50, and then max health. Actually, I like to use max HP equals 100. So that's like emulating 50%. Let's make a function that's just gonna function like render fills maybe. We can go back. I tend to just take a stab at the name and then come back and change it to something that makes more sense later on. And so what we want to do is let's just say that the new percent we're going to do, just to make sure this is working, is percent is going to be equal to like 40. Actually, let's go drastic. Let's go 25, and then fills dot for each. Remember, for each fill that we selected before, with that fill, we're going to manually inject a style, and so that looks like fill dot style dot width. And let's say that it's percent, but then because we want it to be an actual percent, we're going to add the percent sign, which will then turn this whole thing into a string. So the style that will get injected is 25%, which we've hard coded right now. We're going to make that dynamic in a second here. And then we just need to fire it off. So render fills. There you go. Now you see it when the page is ready and page reload that even though we're starting the page off with a fill of 50, let's make that 100 just to make it super clear. This is immediately getting overwritten by JavaScript with this value 25 that we've supplied. And so now we can go ahead and make this dynamic by saying, let's see, it's going to be health over max HP times 100. And then you see, so that is happening. It's going to be 50. Then for each fill that we have, we iterate through and add 50% as the width. And now you see on the screen that our life bar is dynamic. And so we could maybe even go up here changes to like 20. Yeah, and then when the page reloads, you see that now it's doing the correct thing. We even like often, these are easy numbers, but if you did something, yeah, like 20 over 50, I make a lot of RPG games, right? Where you start at like level 1, and so your max health is like 30, but by the end of the game, you're on like level 32, and then your health is like 200 something, right? So the percentage isn't always these nice, beautiful numbers as 1 to 100, but because we're using SVG, we have that percentage styling available to us. So why not use it, right? So with the system we have set up here, we're in good shape to kind of have any like current and max that we want. I'm going to go ahead and reset this anyway, though, to be nice even numbers. And so the next piece I want to make is something that actually kind of sets the new value. So this is all fun and good if it's just static on page load, but that's fairly useless. The idea here is that we need to update the life bar as things change in the game. And so what we can do is make a new function called update health. And then the way I kind of like to do this is with a change or a diff. And so, oops, I keep spelling function wrong. I can't type and talk at the same time. So what we'll do is like mutate health to be plus change, and then go ahead and refire this thing, which will then re-trigger the health to be drawn. And then instead of initializing, we can initialize. What we're going to do is kind of add those buttons so that we can uptick or downtick this in a second. But for now, we'll just kick it off by running this function, change it with 0. So it'll still be those same things that we start with. But it can introduce, it's important to call out here that with this mechanism, we have a nice little place to like cleanse the data. Because if you're, say you did like update health like 300, and then the change is 300, health plus change is going to be over the max limit, and that's bad. You'd see the health bar like go way out or overfill. We wouldn't actually see it overfill because of the nature of SVGs, but that's a real bug I've run into with my games before. And so what we can do here is just say, to cleanse the health value, say like health equals, if health is greater than max health, which we call max HP, go ahead and just set it to max HP. However, if it's not greater, you can just leave it alone, set it to health. So health would be set to whatever health is. If you're not used to reading ternaries, don't worry about it. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. But we're either going to end up setting this to max HP or setting it to what it already is. And this is the case where the health has gone above the max threshold. But let's handle the other case too, where if we're trying to deplete it, say you get hit with something really strong and it's like minus 600 or something, that's going to take you well below 0. So let's just say if after that change has been applied, if health is less than 0, go ahead and just set it to 0 to kind of like floor it there. Otherwise, same thing. You just leave it at health, whatever it was. And so now the idea is that as soon as, whenever render fires again, health is going to be a nice clean value so that our percent is never like over 100% or under 0%. Let's use these things now, use this actual function. So I'm going to, just quick for the video's sake, we're going to use some kind of gross unstyled buttons, but I do have a more fleshed out kind of styled example in that code pane link below. But if I just make a new button and say, let's see, down, and then another one for button, this one will go up. And again, just quick, if we just inline it here, so like on click equals, we're going to fire that update health function. And if we're going down, let's say we go down by like -15, and then I'll copy this over for the up button, but use +15. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our initial call here. So we just start at 100. Now, if I click these buttons down and up here, it should fire the update health with either change -15 or 15. So let's try it. Okay, so we had a little bit of a bug here. I had forgotten the plus or the equal sign, of course. So this is what we had a second ago. My bad. So what we need is health to add change onto it, which I was missing a character. Typical me. And then also we are going to fire this initial state changer right off the bat that way, because in the markup we have it be 100% here and 100% here, but the JavaScript state is starting at 50. So I figured let's just kick it off with whatever the JavaScript says. And so now as I click these buttons, you see that the life bar changes on the fly. And it's got the same thing. If I spam this up button, theoretically the data would be, going over 100%, but we have that cleanse in here. And so even when I hit down, I can hit up all I want, but it's never going to go beyond the ceiling there. And then same here. If I go down, 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 up is safe. So the next thing we're going to do is introduce the nicer colors. So you see this thing doesn't look beautiful. It looks wacky because of the weird testing colors that we used. And so what I'm going to do is just copy over some values I had saved over just for time. I'm going to copy over and then walk you through what's going on. So when we're rendering the fills, we have this render fill function. We can also use that as an opportunity to change the color of the life bar according to the state. So what I've done here is just pasted in some the nicer colors that I had from the design and some code that applies those colors to CSS variables, which we haven't implemented yet. We'll do that now. But just to walk through the logic really quick, remember when we set our percent, it's going to be a number between 0 and 100. We're going to default to say like, hey, let's use green. And so the first CSS variable we're setting here is the body color, and then the second one is that beam of light at the top of the fill. So these are just two nice green colors that I pulled from the editor, the design program. And then we're going to come in and say, but wait, if percent is less than or equal to 50, let's use yellow instead. Don't use green, use yellow. And so here we have two different hex colors that are yellows. Unless you're amazing at reading hex values, you just have to trust me, that's what those are. And then, finally, if our health is really low, like less than 25%, let's use red. And so it's kind of like two checks that happen defaulting to green. And so this code is saying, document element, .style, set property. I Google this kind of thing all the time, but what it's going to let us do is define these CSS variables and edit the value of them at the root. And so in our CSS, we'll go ahead and create the variables. So you do that like this, do like root, and then the value here, let's see. This will get immediately set by the JavaScript, so it doesn't matter too much what we use, but I'll just do green, lime green, doesn't matter. We have one for bar top. And then using, let's see, here's what I mentioned before with needing another class. So we're going to use the CSS variable now to style a class. And so if you remember, we have these health bar fills. This is also the same thing that's being used to select the elements in the JavaScript. Often I like to actually separate those and have a specific class for selecting, but this is just how we're doing it today. And so we'll say fill is going to be using the var. Did I do that right? No, var minus bar fill. Okay, so now we have yellow, right? Because it's starting to pipe in from our yellow state. I'm going to go ahead and change our initial state to be full, or how about like 80? Nice, so now it's green, but you see it already looks flat without that top beam of light. That those little nuances go a long way. And so what we want to do is on the top fill, we're going to add another class, like fill top or something, and then down here we're going to use that other CSS variable, which is called bar top. Right, and so now you see the new color pipe in, and the whole life bar is just looking much nicer. Also, I think that we're all wired up and ready to go here. The logic is in place, so if we update the life bar and then the percent is less than 50 or less than 25, we'll see the color change. So I'm going to hit down, down. There you go. Yellow, red. All right, I'm going to fill us back up here. And now one of the huge advantages of using paths in SVG for this kind of thing is that it gives us access to CSS transitions and animations and those little bits that you get for free. So we can just like sprinkle a little bit more niceness on top of here, where if you notice now when I hit the down button, it just jumps straight to the next value. It feels maybe a little jarring. And then also this color just kind of snaps. But using CSS, we have the opportunity to animate to the next state or animate to the next color. And so I say, let's wire that up just for fun. And if we don't like it, we don't have to keep it, but we might as well try it, right? And so to do that, it should be very simple. So health bar fill, that's the shared class on both of those. What we'll do is just say transition when the width changes for 0.3 seconds linear. Go ahead and animate that over the course of 0.3 seconds rather than just jumping. If we see that, yes, you see it work. This is definitely too slow for my taste. Like that's kind of like, I don't know. Ugh. So I would tighten it up, maybe like 0.1, but it's nice to see it working when we test with the slower value. Yes, this is nice and snappy now. And then we'll do the same thing with the color. So background, the color could probably be longer, again, just to see it working. Linear transition. Oops, colon. Okay, now when I animate and see the color, oh, not background, I'm sorry, fill. We're not editing a background, we're editing a fill because it's an SVG path. I mess that up all the time. Right, and now you can see that when the color changes from green to yellow or yellow to green or whatever, we don't just jump to the next color. The colors animate to where they're going to go. Nice and smooth and gradual. Again, that's a little too long for my taste. I'd prefer it to be tighter and snappier. Maybe at one point, that's probably too much. Yeah, that's nice. So there we have it. Pretty quickly, we went from designing an asset in a pixel art program to converting it to SVG, augmenting that SVG with our own paths, and those paths are then connected to state and somehow. So I hope that the general technique that I've shown you here today is useful to you. That wraps it up for what I want to cover in the video. But again, check out the CodePen link below. There's more to it. There's a little piece where when the character's life depletes, the character changes. There's a character on screen. There's just a little bit more here, more stylized buttons. You can also take that and run with it. So that's it for this one. Appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe and all that if you're interested in seeing more of these tutorials. I've got a few more I want to make. So have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.